steps, promoting patient safety, improving health.
My name is Adam Hoffman. I'm a simulation educational specialist at West Virginia STEPS, and in conjunction with the Office of Interprofessional Education at West Virginia University, this is Debriefing Interprofessional Teams. So what is debriefing? As you can see on the slide, debriefing must be a bi-directional endeavor. This is a difficult skill for many of our traditional teachers to master, and that they're used to disseminating their knowledge to the students, rather than the students being guided to the learning. Obviously, our goals are always to improve future clinical practice. And in debriefing, we do this through Socratic questioning, discussions, and reflection. So where do we start? Well, with all good education, it starts with our objectives. Everything we do needs to be tied back to those objectives. And so it's important that you take the time to write those quality objectives or review thoroughly the objectives that someone else has written. Also, the design of our simulation and our pre-brief can set you up for success or failure in your debrief. We want to create an environment that's psychologically safe from the very outset of that simulation. We want the students to understand clearly the objectives, what we want them to perform, as well as the environment that they're going to perform it in, the tools they have at their disposal, the capabilities of the mannequin, for example, or the sim center. All of those things will drastically improve the quality of your debrief and help you prevent some of those blunders. So this is an example of the simplest experiential learning cycle. We're going to do a thing, or the students, I should say, will do a thing. And then what happened? This is our reaction phase. What did we do? What was the outcome? And then so what? What do those results imply? What is that experience telling us? And then now what? Or that's the summary phase. What are the takeaway points? And what are we going to do in future practice? There are several methods that we can use for debriefing, and these are certainly not an all-encompassing list, but here are some of the most popular ones you'll see out there. The first one is the GAS method, which stands for Gather, Analyze, and Summarize. This is really the easiest and simplest debriefing framework to master. It's really good for short, repetitive debriefings. Think an ACLS class or another canned course, but it's also the least thorough method. So you're going to start by encouraging your students to gather information about their experience and then guide them through analyzing what went well and maybe what didn't go so well, and then summarize or help them summarize their analysis of that. The next form is plus delta, and that's the next highest yield, but it's still very simple. It's basically what went well and what could go better. Initially allow them to express what happened and off-gas any emotions they have about their experience, and then use the plus delta framework to proceed through the analysis portion. Debriefing with good judgment is a higher level debriefing technique. It starts to investigate the frames or the context in which learners' mind that help lead them to a decision. For example, you might say, I saw that you gave nitroglycerin before checking the patient's blood pressure. The standard is to check the blood pressure first. Can you tell me why you did this? This form works the best against an objective standard. Make sure when you ask these questions, you're doing it with an open mind, genuinely seeking the answer. There are times in our practice that we've noticed that the students actually came up with a reason that we hadn't thought of. So the next highest level, and this is an advanced technique called advocacy inquiry, that allows you to explore further into that frame of thought. It could sound something like, as the entitled CO2 began to rise, you turned up the rate on the ventilator, which is the right action. Can you tell me what differential you had in your mind at that point? That will allow you to explore why the learners chose a particular action and their thoughts at that given time, which then you can then teach to that frame to help them make better decisions, not only in this very specific clinical situation in the future, but maybe even extrapolate that to different clinical situations as well. Circular questioning is an advanced technique. It's particularly useful in addressing specific, spicy, if you will, or personal conflicts. It takes a lot of practice and can be useful, but it can be very useful in addressing a lot of things that could be emotionally charged. And it has the added benefit of not casting blame towards any one party. For example, let's say in a simulation you had a medical student completely discount what a nursing student was saying or interrupt them while they were giving a report. In this example, we'll say the med student is Susie and the nursing student was Tim. Then you might ask the respiratory therapy student, Bill, what he thought about the interaction and how he thought that might make Tim feel. This is a good way to delve into those spicier conversations without casting any blame on anyone, and it's certainly a conversation starter. All right, so how do we structure our conversation? Well, essentially going to run in a 3-phase structure. Initially, that reactions phase. We're going to move then to the analysis phase and then the summary phase. And we've already touched on that a little bit. So the reaction phase is your opportunity to allow the learners to off-gas any emotions they may be feeling. Be curious and be an active listener and encourage the students to do all of the talking. Listen for items that you maybe hadn't thought of to address in the analysis or summary phase. Make sure you allow sufficient time to decompress and then use your judgment as to when to move to the objectives in the analysis phase. The learner speaking is going to take the lead here. In the analysis phase, this is really all questions from you as the facilitator, not telling the students. You want to help guide them towards the learning objectives with those questions. And you want to try to develop a shared mental model of what happened during the simulation and why. This is where your strategy, whatever debriefing strategy you're going to use, kind of comes into play. Make sure you guide the conversation that you touch on all of the learning objectives that you want to touch on. And lastly is the summary phase. And this is your time to wrap everything up in a nice little bow for the learners to ensure that all of your objectives were covered. And you can also bring up anything you noticed hasn't been addressed yet. It's helpful to have the group in this phase identify changes they're going to make in the future. So here are some example questions for each phase. Can you recall, or what can you infer from? Make sure that your questions are open-ended in nature. You don't want to ask yes and no questions. You want to stimulate conversation amongst the learners, albeit a little guided towards our learning objectives. Okay, so that's the basics of debriefing. So what's the difference with interprofessional education, and how can we tie that in with our interprofessional education offerings? Well, the biggest difference is that generally we are facilitating in content, and with interprofessional education, the objectives are much more about teamwork and roles. So this can be a really challenging piece for our educators, or they're far more used to content discussions. Making that shift in your mind as the facilitator away from pure content and towards those interprofessional objectives. Co-facilitators are another opportunity or challenge, depending on your situation. It can be a huge benefit to our learners, and it gives them another perspective and additional experience in the debriefing, but it can be a real challenge to the debriefing team. So make sure you plan ahead and discuss how you want the debriefing to go, what structure you're going to use, who's going to cover which objectives. Maybe you'll have a lead debriefer and a following facilitator. Be sure you're both clear on the objectives and what you want to cover. And don't be afraid to ask to have a quick discussion after the simulation event, but before the debriefing. Hey, did you see this? Hey, did you see that? Well, we had this plan, but maybe I'll take that, this specific piece of the objective. So make sure you guys are on the same page before you walk into your debriefing. All right, so how can we master debriefing? There are a lot of online tools and resources. Here's a couple here. Debrief to Learn and Team Steps obviously are nationally known for their information. Steps also offers a simulation certificate program that can help you hone your skills and give you some more tools in the toolbox. And of course, practice makes perfect. This is something that you're not going to be great at the first time you do it, but I promise it does get better every time you go through it. So I'm genuinely interested to hear about your experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. My contact info is on the last slide, and it's going to be listed in the video description. Please reach out to me with any questions you have or to tell me about your experiences, what worked really well for you, what totally went pear-shaped for you. Really interested to hear from all of you about what we can do better. So I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Bill Tulloch, who's an adjunct professor at STEPS that helped me create this presentation. And lastly, my contact slide. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or you would like any more resources. This video is going to be posted online. Feel free to call or email or hit me on Twitter. Love to hear from you all. Thank you and have a wonderful day.